This is Dr. Maddy Roth with Roth Consulting Group. I'm so honored today to have Doug Vestal on the show. As many of you know, he's married to the lovely Lindsey Vestal, who I had on the show last week. Today, we're going to be chatting about personal finances, specifically for rehab professionals. And through these discussions, we're actually going to get an exclusive little sneak peek chat about his new book called Financial Freedom for OTs. So thank you so much for coming on this show. Doug, if you could introduce yourself and tell us about your background, what brought you to this point of writing a book.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here talking with you and your audience. Let's rewind a little bit. So you mentioned my wife, Lindsey Vestal. So she's an occupational therapist specializing in pelvic floor therapy. And her and I have been together. We've been married almost 20 years. It'll be 20 years this May. We've been together for 23, married for 20. My background is actually, I worked on Wall Street for 15 years. So I did master's in financial mathematics and a PhD in statistics and applied probability, and then went to work on Wall Street. And that was the same time that Lindsey went to OT school. So we arrived in 2008. She enrolled at NYU and then graduated in 2011. And then in 2014, we started our own private pay practice in New York City called the Functional Pelvis. I worked, in addition to my day job, behind the scenes on all of the business aspects. So the systems and finances, the strategy, the sales and marketing, because Lindsey really wanted to focus on being client facing. And it really takes a team. Until you open your own practice, you don't really realize all of the other stuff that actually goes into making a practice successful. I worked on that. And at the time, I was still ramping up my career on Wall Street, and Lindsey came out of NYU with about $150,000 of student loan debt, which is just an outrageous amount for a new grad to have. OTs across the board face that. PTs across the board face that, especially if you go on and you get your doctoral. And so we were really in a stressful place when it came to money. I had been interested in personal finance for a long time. I tell this story in my book. I got really interested in personal finance when I was 17 because my dad was mismanaging all of his money. On the surface, we lived in a nice house. He drove a nice car. But I couldn't figure it out because we'd go to restaurants and his credit card would get declined. But then he would have to take out the second credit card that would get declined. Finally, by the fourth or fifth, something would go through. And it would often, this is back in the day when you didn't have cell phones, he wouldn't pick up the phone at night when we would get calls because it would always be like a debt collector. And I just couldn't figure out, money stress was just pervasive in the house that I lived in. And I couldn't figure out, because I looked up to my dad and he's such a smart guy. Why was he mismanaging his money so much? And it was around this time that a really pivotal book, at least for me, came out called The Millionaire Next Door. The Millionaire Next Door was really the first study of true wealth in the country. And it busted a lot of myths around, how much you actually need to make to become wealthy. What are the behaviors and habits of wealthy people? And that was really super eye-opening for me. And so starting from about 17, I started investing and saving. I've been doing it now for, 28 years, I guess, because I'm about to be 45. So when Lindsey graduated with all of that student loan debt, we put in place a really structured plan and really cut our expenses and actually paid off that $150,000 of student loan debt in 3 years. We really got after it. And that has given us an enormous amount of freedom and flexibility and to not be carrying this mortgage, basically around with us. And many of her classmates, she graduated, 14 years ago. Many of her classmates are still struggling with that student loan debt. I wanted to write a book that was going to be applicable. OT's in the name, but it really applies to any rehab professional. We can get into why that is. I really wanted to write a book that shows tried and true techniques and strategies to eliminate debt, get a handle of your finances, and start saving with retirement. Because all of us hopefully live long enough that we are going to be in retirement for many years, and we have to have a strategy in place to be able to fund that.
Wow. I am just your heart behind the book, telling that story about your dad. And it's not just, okay, you went to school for finance. just you have a deep personal connection and drive to help people because of that. It's just so amazing. Wow. I'm so excited to hear more.
Thank you.
So yeah, this is really niche too, like the
Yes.
rehab professionals. What Going back though, I mean, I know we have so much to talk about, but I am just so intrigued by your life. What do you do on Wall Street? Is that like stocks or what's
Yeah.
that like?
I had an interesting career because I graduated in 2008 at the height of the financial crisis. And my PhD was actually on collateralized debt obligations, the things that were behind the cause of the financial crisis. I didn't have anything to do with it. I was in grad school at the time, but coming out of grad school with a dissertation where CDOs is written in the name, I was imminently unhireable. Like I could not get a job because Wall Street banks were just cutting everybody. It was not, we were really deep into that financial crisis. So I ended up getting a job at a startup actually. And so there was me and the two co-founders, and we worked out of like Five Pin Plaza right above Penn Station in New York City. And there I was a quant. So I was doing all of the computer coding of these like really technical models. And then we ran out of funding after the first year. But I think that year being at that startup it was really a gift to the beginning of my career because you had to wear so many hats. So even though I was the quant, I was going to meetings and having to explain the way the model worked to investors and to stakeholders. So after that, I went to UBS, which is a Swiss investment bank, and I got a job on the trading floor actually. So I was trading very complex financial derivatives. So it wasn't stocks, it was credit derivatives. So like CDOs and credit default swaps. And then after that, I actually transitioned into risk management. So ultimately, when I retired from Wall Street, I was the global head of counterparty credit risk at a major investment bank and had about a team of 25 people, had staff in New York City, London, and Hong Kong. And we were responsible for managing hundreds of billions of dollars of counterparty risk that we had to our clients. I built the entire stress testing framework at that particular investment bank. And then on a day-to-day basis, most of my interactions were actually with the regulators because it's, what you see in the movies is not really what it's like in real life on Wall Street. They are so heavily regulated. There are meetings with the regulators pretty much every single week, almost every single day, because they give so much scrutiny to what's happening. And with my technical background, but that ability to communicate about the models, they put me in front of regulators to be the liaison between the bank and them.
So for the OTs and PTs listening, you have to tell us what makes you enjoy statistics and math. What drove you into that kind of realm? Because all of our rehab minds are probably like, oh, that was my worst subject in school.
I mean, for me, it started at, I wasn't a great student in middle school. Like I was actually a very, very poor student in middle school, but I think that had a lot to do with my family environment and the situation that I was in. I turned things around in 10th grade, and it was like the first subject that I found that I was good at, actually. I really liked how structured it was. I liked that there was a right answer at the end of the day. I liked the problem solving. I really enjoy tackling complex things and like sitting with it for a long time to try to figure out the best way forward, which I think is one of the things that made it so great with starting Lindsey's business, because you need to have that strategy and that sort of thinking 5 moves in advance. Even though I have that math background, I can now apply it in the real world, especially from my business career.
I know this last year, I've really tried to take the emotion behind our marketing, and I don't really have a great math brain, but to me, I run a little bit of probability and statistics in my head at a rudimentary level, just kind of like, okay, if I'm going to do this workshop, this is statistically how many people we're going to get from it if my one OT does a workshop. Some workshops will get 0, some will get this amount. And same with our Facebook ads. If I run this picture and these words, I try to take the emotion out of it and just say, well, that one ran for a month and we got no leads. That's fine. And then I'm going to tweak it in some way so that we do get clicks, and kind of what picture we're more likely to get clicks on, what verbiage. And it's just really helped me to take the emotion out of it and just be like, okay, this is actually just, we're playing statistics here, like which image or audience are we more likely to get clicks. So that's
Well, I
really
think that's right. I think so much, and people miss this with business, I think, is that what I find, because I support OTs who want to start their own private pay practice now. That's what I'm doing full time. And it's, for me, everything is just an experiment, like that is all of business, is that you have to iterate and experiment with it. It's like there is not one sort of perfect ad, like it's better to get something really good and then iterate on that, because the data is going to tell you what is actually working at the end of the day. And so I always recommend my students move a little bit quicker than you're comfortable with, because that thing you think is perfect, I've seen the story before. 3 years from now, it's going to look totally different. And the only way we get 3 years from now is that we actually start doing it, because as they say, you can't drive a parked car, right? So we have to be able to get the car in gear and actually start navigating it. And that's just means taking imperfect action on it.
Yeah. Before we get more into your book, can you tell us about your coaching program? What do you do for OTs and maybe
Sure.
some PTs too?
Yeah, so it's called Private Pay MBA, and it is a combination of an online program plus 6 months of weekly group coaching with me. It is for anybody who's looking to start a private pay practice. What we have is we have like a 7-chapter course going through mindset, because mindset, I think, is the biggest thing, right? All business problems are really personal problems in disguise. So like really focusing on the mindset is absolutely critical, especially around money, because being private pay, as you know, brings up so many feelings around money and access, which we could definitely talk about. And then it goes into like all of the business logistics of how to actually start getting your type 2 NPI number, figuring out the right business entity, opening up the bank account. Then we go into like pricing your services, the systems that you need to set up, client lifecycle, community-based marketing, marketing to practitioners, developing a 90-day marketing plan, and then stepping into that role as a CEO and looking at like your key performance indicators. And what I found from coaching people and mentoring them is that the head knowledge just isn't enough. Like we can have all the head knowledge in the world, but still not act on it. So that's why it comes with those 6 months of weekly group coaching with me, so that they don't get stuck on anything. I would rather be able to answer their question in 3 hours than have them debating a decision for 3 weeks, because that's just going to delay their progress. I think it's the most comprehensive program that's out there with the most amount of accountability and support, because I also review all of their marketing materials, or critique their websites, look at their client intake process. Like it's really a hands-on sort of program that I offer.
I love that. That is so great. Is that mostly for newer business owners or intermediate?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first started, I said it was only for new business owners, but then I had a lot of people who had tried to DIY it themselves, and they were 2 or 3 years into it and things just weren't working. And so I really say if you've already started but you're seeing less than 10 clients a week, it's a good fit for what I offer. But if you are like looking at, like you're really killing it, you're at 20 visits a week, you're looking at hiring a second practitioner or opening up a location, it's probably not the best fit. So it's anyone from who's just starting to probably up to 10 client visits a week will get the most out of it.
Cool. I just am so amazed how much I've had to pull from coaches and even my family, and I feel so blessed. Like, I don't know how people do it. It really takes an army to get your business going. From the amount of times I've had to just talk to my uncle who's a lawyer about things. Luckily, he's like an employment lawyer, the perfect uncle to
Oh,
have
that's good.
for this. And I have another uncle that's in more of like the lease agreement type stuff. So it's just, I mean, there's so many things as a business owner you have to pull. And maybe if you don't know it yourself, seeking out services like what you have to offer, because some people don't have, I mean, not that you're a lawyer, but
Yeah.
some people don't have, my husband, he's in the financial realm, but most people don't have husbands like you with Lindsey that can help with that kind of thing. And it's really scary as a PT or an OT in business, just like, my gosh, I don't want to do this wrong, but I just want to see these patients. So
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, no one, just like personal finance, none of us learn this sort of business in your OT program or your PT program. It's really, the barrier to entry to start your practice is actually super, super low, right? It doesn't really, especially if you start mobile, right? Like the startup costs are not super great. A lot of people will just try to wing it and do it themselves, but then they end up having this sort of thing that they've been working on the side for 2 or 3 years and isn't really progressing. And I always say, like, I have a mentor myself, right? Like I get coaching myself, and it's like the benefit is that you don't make the same mistakes that other people make, and you get to your destination hopefully faster if you're taking the action. And for me, that's the return on investment you're looking for, is that are you going to learn skills that allow you to make more than what the program or the coaching cost you? And if so, in my opinion, like this is the way I evaluated my own life, it's a no-brainer. Like you're learning skills to take up your economic security. So why would you not do it? Is kind of the way I think about it.
And the compounding effect, say if you're working with a client and telling them, hey, you're way underpriced for your market. I mean, yeah, they're going to have higher prices in that 6 months they're working with you, but over the years, like to make that price change,
it's huge. Yeah. It pays for itself.
Yeah. Okay, so now we can chat about your book. I'm so excited to hear more, and I'm definitely going to get it once it comes out. What inspired you to write Financial Freedom for OTs? I know you talked a little bit about that, but do you have anything more to add?
Yeah, I would say it really is. I've seen this big trend in social media around side hustles and increasing your income and everything else. And I just think, as someone who's paid off our debt and reached, financial independence, there's no shortcut to it. And so I see a lot of misinformation out there. And I think there are unique situations that OTs and PTs, other rehab professionals, find themselves in, which is this really high level of debt relative to low salaries, and that really presents a unique challenge when you add on the third component, which is the money mindset that a lot of rehab professionals have. It's like that mix of high debt, relatively low salary, and limiting beliefs around money is just this combination that I think keeps a lot of rehab professionals really stuck in a really stressful money situation and living paycheck to paycheck. I looked at it and I was like, well, no one else is doing this. No one else is writing a book on this and talking about it. So it's a real need, I think. So why don't I just do it? So that was it. Yeah.
Yeah. I see a lot of Instagrams where there's big, at least in the PT world, there's some big name PTs that will post things like basically discouraging college students from getting into the rehab profession just because of that, having a lot of debt and low income. I'm excited to hear more about that too. Why do you think, kind of tying back into that, why do you think financial education is important for rehab professionals in particular?
So I think it comes back to really the role of money stress in everyone's life. In particular for rehab professionals, what I found, I mean, I'm going to speak in broad terms. Obviously it varies by the individual, but that there is a real emphasis that any talk about money makes you greedy, that any desire around money makes you greedy and a bad person. And I think that holds a lot of rehab professionals back from even thinking about the role that money plays in their life. So what will happen is a lot of new grads will come out of school and they're very excited to dive into their specialty. They might take a lower paying job than they would have otherwise. But over time, the stress of money really starts to accumulate. And if you look at the statistics, 72% of divorces in America are from money arguments. More than any other fights with your spouse about anything else. It is arguments around money. And we know what happens to the nervous system when we're really stressed around money. We know what happens to our bodily functions when we are really stressed. And this happens with money, but we don't really take the time to be introspective about it because we have all of this past limiting beliefs and money trauma that we start to avoid it as a topic. And it's really a trauma response because everything that you hear around, like, I can't save, I can't budget, I can't earn more, things like this, that's really avoidance behavior, coming out. What I'd like to see is that I'm obviously not a rehab professional myself, but you guys do such amazing work and makes such huge impacts on your clients' lives, but then go home and struggle financially and feel guilty also about struggling financially. How can we flip that so that the people who are caring for others are cared for themselves? That's what I would really like to see as the end result of the book, is that people get out of debt, they start saving for retirement, they feel like they have this breathing room, because at the end of the day, for me, it's all about occupational choice. You shouldn't have to make decisions from a place of scarcity around money. Like if you have a little bit of money, then that affords you to take maybe half a day on Friday to spend with your kids and to volunteer at school, right? That's an amazing thing. If you have a little bit more money and you have a toxic director of rehab with super high productivity standards, you could take 3 months off and find a job that really aligns with you. If you have like even more money, then you could maybe cut down on your commute and take a lower paying job that is closer to you so that you're not having this bookend long commute. And so for me, it's like really a tool to enhance the quality of your life for the values that are really important to you. And that starts with getting a handle on it and becoming successful with it.
I always wished in high school they would have, we had a financial class, but it was so out there, like talking about stocks and CDs, stuff that, maybe is important, but it's like most people that graduated from my high school don't even know how to look at their expenses for the month and how much they're making or track it. And really their best way of tracking it is just how much is left in the account or how much do I have on my credit card that I can spend. Like that's how they budget. Yeah. I wish they had a little bit more of that practical information in school.
Side of it. Well, yeah. And I think the one thing is, and I'll ask you this question. So for me, understanding how money grows is really super important. So I'll give you one example. And I love giving this a question, which is, would you rather have $1 million today or have a penny that doubles every day for 30 days? So I could write you a check for $1 million today or give you this magical penny that's going to double. So today it's worth a penny, tomorrow it's worth 2 cents, then it's 4 cents, then it's 8 cents. And that happens for 30 days and then it just stops. Which would you rather have?
Probably the million.
The million. Most people say that. But if you have a penny that doubles every single day, at the end of those 30 days, it's worth 5.4 million.
Wow.
It's astronomical. Now, obviously, you can't find a penny that doubles every day, but it's this little small accumulation that over time that really adds up. And that's what most people don't get, is that you can actually grow your money through investing and let compound interest earn you money, right? And so this is like a prime example of stuff that we need to be sharing with everyone, because at the end of the day, you can just take your salary, if you're saving more of your salary, and you start investing it over a very, very long time period, it is going to grow and you are going to have a secure retirement. But it takes the discipline to start doing that now, because it literally takes decades. It's not an overnight thing. And we need to do a better job of letting people know, the 20-year-olds, the 25-year-olds coming out of school, to start investing with your first paycheck, because your 55-year-old self is going to definitely thank you in the future.
Yeah. So in your book, you introduce a concept called a freedom number. I don't know if that's something you kind of thought of or if that's a common financial term, but what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So, retirement is this interesting thing where everyone thinks that retirement is a fixed age, right? Like I'm going to retire when I'm 65. I'm going to retire when I'm 72. But that is actually a relatively like recent phenomenon, right? Because if you were alive in the 1800s, there was no retirement. There was no plan to like get up and move down to South Florida and play pickleball. Like you worked until basically the day that you died or you became infirmed, and then your family had to take care of you. The age 65 and everything really came out because of Social Security. And Social Security was actually put in place not because the government wanted you to really retire and move to Florida, but because at the time there was too many workers. There weren't enough jobs for younger people. And so they created Social Security to incentivize the older adults to retire, to make room in the workforce for younger people. And so we have this idea that retirement is 65, right? But retirement is actually just a number. You can retire anytime that you can replace the cost of your expenses with investments that you have. And so the freedom number allows you to know what that final destination is. And so what you do is, I have like a whole worksheet in the book for this, is you start to look at what does your ideal life look like in retirement? How much traveling are you doing? How much money are you spending on your hobbies? What are your fixed expenses? What are your variable expenses that you really want to go all in on? And you design your life around that. And you start to add up those numbers, right? And you go, okay, every year I need $60,000 to be able to live. If I had $60,000 a year, the cars were paid for, the house was paid for, I would be living my best life. And then there is a study that was done, it's called the Trinity study. And that study showed that every year you could withdraw 4% from your retirement portfolio and not run out of money. If you had $1 million in your investment portfolio, you could withdraw 4% of that, which is $40,000 a year, right? The freedom number is really important because it gives you the final destination that you're working towards. And most people think they need a lot more money to retire than they actually do. And so the first step is really understanding what that ideal life looks like, add up all of those expenses for the year, and then multiply that by 25. And that's what you need. That's your target that you're working towards. So does that make sense?
So do you typically recommend with rehab professionals, they have this big debt, say, do you typically recommend kind of gung-ho Dave Ramsey, chip away at that debt first before you start to invest, or kind of a happy medium? What do you typically recommend?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what I recommend is that you take advantage of your employer match. So a lot of employers will offer a 401k or a 403b. So the first thing I recommend is ensuring that you are automatically enrolled to get that match. And normally that means that you have to contribute a minimum. So let's say the match that you can get is 5%. Like the range is normally anywhere from like 3 to 7 with 5% most common. So what that means is that if you're making $100,000, let's using round numbers, if you contribute your 5%, so 5 grand, then your employer will contribute another 5 grand. So that 5,000 immediately doubles to 10,000. It's free money. It's in the cost of your employment contract. So the first thing I recommend is making sure that you're getting that full match, because if you have that $5,000 coming in from your employer match and you do that for 30 years, over 30 years, that's going to grow to 904,000. Like it's a massive amount due to the effect of compound interest, And so you really want to make sure that you're maximizing it. So you do that first. And then after that, I recommend paying off your student loans absolutely as fast as possible, because it's very tough to have any financial wiggle room if all of your monthly income is being eaten up by student loans, which is the case for most people. And so you really have to look at ways of becoming flexible and getting creative to pay off those student loans very quickly. So the reason why Lindsey and I were able to pay off her $150,000 of student loan debt in 3 years is because we dramatically downsized. So we were living in an expensive neighborhood in Battery Park City, and we had 2 kids in daycare. Like I think our daycare bill basically matched like her OT salary, at the end of the day. And so it's like, okay, great, you're going to work just to pay for someone else to take care of your kids. Like it's not a great trade at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so we moved into a really crummy 1-bedroom apartment with 2 kids in Chinatown. It was a safe neighborhood, but it was in Chinatown. We sent our kids to a Chinese daycare, and we cut our fixed expenses in half. And then we threw all of that extra money to her student loans. I've interviewed another OT, Natalie Gaskin, on my YouTube channel. When she got out of OT school, her and her husband went and lived with his parents actually for 2 years. And she paid off $103,000 of student loan debt in 2 years. So faster than what Lindsey and I did. So it's like you have to get creative around these mechanisms to start to be able to pay off, because you need to find the wiggle room sort of somewhere. And you can do it by automatically enrolling in auto debit, like that will give you some measure of decrease in your interest rate. Any extra money you get, like a tax refund, you send it to that. You try to find ways of increasing your income, ways of decreasing your expenses. But yeah, I recommend making sure that you're getting that match and then prioritizing paying off your student loan debt.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a great plan. And circling back to the mindset of rehab professionals, do you have any strategies for PTs, OTs about these limiting beliefs about money?
Yeah, I think, it's funny. We never really stop to question our beliefs around money. And most people have a really negative connotation when it comes to money. And so I have an exercise in the book where I ask people to think through, when we all carry around like keystone memories from when we were a kid, right? Like there are certain events from being raised that really you can find yourself thinking about the most often, right? And often it's at a very surface level. And so the first thing I ask people is start to reflect on those keystone memories and really start to pull at the thread and see if there was a role of money that played in any of those, right? It could be an argument that you overheard with your parents. It could be something that your dad said to you, something that your mom said to you. But often there is some thread of money in a lot of those keystone events if you're willing to sort of roll up and look at it. And that's where the earliest memories of money come from. It comes from these statements that we heard from our parents of, what do you think, money grows on trees? Like, no way we could afford that. Or look at that ostentatious person driving that car. Or your uncle is so mean because he's really selfish and greedy. Like, we have these things that have collectively happened to us. And we let that influence our approach and our feelings and thoughts about money. And so the first step is really just becoming aware of that and then starting to rewrite the script for yourself. Because at the end of the day, money in of itself has no bias, no political agenda. It's the people with money that have the bias and a political agenda, right? And so money is just a tool, right? You can use it for good, you could use it for bad. It's up to you as the person. And I've never met an OT or a PT who didn't want to do more good with more money, And so it's like really coming to terms of like, you are the architect of your own life. You can write that script for yourself and use money to give back in the community, use money to hire employees so that you can serve more clients, use money so that you can go and offer pro bono sessions like once a week, if that's something that's really important to you, and not have to worry about that financial stress. And then the last part is just realizing that actually on your existing salary, you can achieve financial independence over time. It's not going to happen overnight. But, Dave Ramsey and that book I talked to you about, the Millionaire Next Door, when they analyze the millionaires in the country, do you know one of the top 5 professions that comes back?
No.
It's a teacher. And teachers make less than OTs and PTs, right? And so if teachers can do it on a teacher salary, then OTs and PTs can definitely do it, because even though you make less money relative to your student loan debt, you still make really good salary compared to the average American, right? And so it's, if I always go like, if the average American can live on much less than what an OT and PT makes, then we have to find a way to start saving that difference to put towards your eventual retirement. And so I think it's really like understanding the role of money trauma in your life, understanding that it's just a tool and that you are the architect of that tool. You get to use it for good. And then realizing that other professions that make less money than you can do it. So it's actually achievable for yourself.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting. And going back to the social media, there is a lot of noise around that. Like, don't get into the PT field. All these PTs are leaving the field, at least in PT. I don't know if it's the same with OT. Do you think PT and OT is an okay field to get into, or do you think
Yeah,
it's kind of a silly decision?
no, I do think it's a good, I think it's a fantastic field to get into because it's incredibly rewarding. But I think like with any profession, you should go into it with eyes wide open. And if you can afford to go to a cheaper school, my advice for people applying to OT or PT school is, if you can afford to go to a cheaper school, go to that, right? Because at least in the OT world, I don't know about the standards for PT, but in the OT world, you have to satisfy the A code standards. So you're learning the same stuff regardless of what the schools that you go to, and so you're not going to find that actually. Once you start working after about 2 years, no one's ever going to ask you what school that you went to. And so finding that state school that is 25% the cost of a private school is really super important. And then I would say take out the bare minimum of loans that you can while you're there. Maybe you are picking up a side job to cover your living expenses. And then when you come out, just really focus on paying off your student loan debt like it's your full-time job. Like it's the most important thing in the world. It's a five-alarm, fire that needs to be handled now, like not sometime in the distant future. And so I think when you do that, then you start to practice the way that you want to practice as an OT or PT. Like options start to open up. I think a lot of the frustration that people have in the rehab profession comes from actual money stress because they're put in situations and work environments that have very high productivity standards, very high documentation requirements, but that's just that environment. It's not the field. And so having a little bit of financial flexibility to either do your own thing or to work in an environment that's much better suited to you, and not make the decision around money is the best way to really excel in this area.
So let's talk about the three pillars in your book. You talk about earning more, saving more, and investing more. Do you have
Yeah.
any tips for all three of those or in some of those pillars for
Yeah,
the listeners today?
sure. Let's talk about saving more because that is the number one thing that is going to actually move the needle. So lifestyle inflation is a real thing. So even if you start making more and you don't get a handle of your savings, you're going to start just spending more that aligns to what you're making. And so the key with saving more is the dreaded word budget, is like making sure that you are on some type of budget. And what I recommend in the book is a 50-30-20 plan. And so 50% is for your fixed expenses, like your must-haves, your rent, your car insurance, car payment, stuff like that. Then your 30% is any variable stuff, and then 20% is your savings rate. And so I have an exercise in the book where I ask people to go in and track this stuff and then bucket it into those categories and see if you're meeting that 20% level. And the most important thing is to pay yourself first. So most people will get the paycheck deposited on the first, and then they will start spending throughout the month. And then they will look at their bank account on the 30th, hope and pray that there's some sort of money in there, and whatever is left, either they go out and spend or they save that. But the practice that financially successful people do is they invert it and they pay themselves first. So the moment the paycheck gets deposited, they take that 20% or 10% if you can't do 20% yet, and they save it and they invest it. And that is the way, because you will spend whatever money is in your bank account. It's just human nature to do that, And so you really have to understand the psychology behind that and start paying yourself first and set it up so that it's successful so that you never even see that money enter your account. And you can do that through automatically paying more on your student loan debt every single month, right? And just increase the amount that's coming out. You could do it by saving more in your 401k or your 403b because that gets taken out pre-tax before you ever even get paid. Like there's numerous ways to do it, but that's the most important thing to do. And then making sure, as we talked about, that you are investing from the very beginning, at least getting your match. And then if you can do more than that, starting to invest in low cost index funds. So things that are passively managed because you don't want to pay a ton in fees. And what I recommend is if you're just getting started, you don't like all this sounds like gibberish, you just go and you buy something called a target date fund. And a target date fund is just like we go, I'm going to retire in year 2065, and I'm going to buy a target date fund that says 2065. And that portfolio manager rebalances the stocks and the bonds. You don't have to do anything. And it's super low cost. Like investing should be as boring as watching paint dry. Like it is not something that you are going in and trading. And that's trading in my sense, even though I was a trader, that's akin to gambling. Like we are doing long-term buy and hold. It's not sexy. It's very, very vanilla. It's super boring. I don't have stock tips for anyone, but it's just you do it. It's tried and true over time. And then from an earning perspective, I mean, my favorite thing is starting a private pay practice because I think you have the ability to earn a lot more as an OT or PT when you do that. And there are really great tax benefits to having your own practice. So if you are only going to be working for yourself and not having employees, you can do something called a solo 401k, which allows the business to contribute up to 25% of your compensation as a 401k match. That's really great because you can eliminate the business taxes and you can really start to supercharge your retirement savings.
Mm-hmm. That's a great idea. Do you give your coaching clients some of these little tips in your coaching program?
Yes. Yeah. It's not a huge focus of my program, but like when we start talking about money, yeah, I can talk about it for hours. So
Yeah.
yeah.
If people are still confused about what you're talking about, do you think it's helpful for people to work with a financial advisor that's local to them, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think you want to be careful who you work with because most people in the finance world are actually commission-based salespeople. What I would really recommend is that you work with a certified financial planner who has a fiduciary responsibility to you. And you want to look for someone who gets paid basically by the hour or by the project. They're not taking a percentage of the investments that you have with them because there is numerous conflicts of interest with that and very low transparency. And the number one drag that's going to pull down your investment returns is paying very high fees. And so I think if someone wants a plan and get started and they can't do it themselves, going to a certified financial planner and going, hey, give me a solid financial plan, tell me exactly what to do, and in exchange for that I'm going to pay you X number of hundreds of dollars, and then there's like a check-in to look at that. I think that that's great, but I would not recommend people go to these other common like Charles Schwab type environments because typically you're going to be put into really, really high cost programs that don't have the transparency.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the secret tip.
Yeah.
So, is there anything else we didn't chat about with your book? Anything else people should know?
I think just know that it's actually possible. Know that it is something that is within your reach. It might require you to be a little bit weird in your social circle because people looked at us like we were growing a unicorn, when we moved into that one bedroom apartment, right? But the benefit of it is that we learned a lot of financial discipline and was able to get out of that student loan debt. And that is something that's available to a lot of people to do. And so it it requires, if you want different results than what you have now, it requires you doing something different. And I think just realizing that and knowing that there's not going to be anybody that comes and saves you or just hands you the money. Like every normal, everyday Americans are figuring this out for themselves each and every day, and taking that sort of personal responsibility of going like, okay, I have to do this for myself. I have to do this for my family. Let's roll up our sleeves. Like, how do we get this done? Is something that's really important to do, because otherwise time is just going to pass and it's not going to get done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tell the listeners where they can find your book and more info about your coaching program. Some of the,
Yeah.
I don't know if you have a website.
Yeah, so for the book, it's available starting at the end of Feb on Amazon. So you can just go to Amazon and type Financial Freedom for OTs. The subtitle is A Guide for Building Wealth Without Burnout. And then if you want to learn anything about my business coaching, you can go to freedomofpractice.com and check it out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. Hopefully everyone, you'll buy his book. Sounds great. And yeah, I think that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maddy.